reading A House of Thieves, which is a favourite poem of mine, and I let John steal my thunder. That is one poem of mine that I can actually recite. Candy, so I'm sorry, Candy recites all of those. But I'm glad to have the poem shared. And John was kind enough to say, I think aptly in a way, that though I do write long, I write right across the page, which is why we stretched the format here, and I sometimes go through a number of lines. I think, in fact, what Gregory Day got it right when he said once Mark Tredinnick is a failed minimalist. So here's the extent of my failure through the last 4 years. You'll find all the leaves as well as the trees here. I'm also struck, and I'm indebted to my friend and translator Isabel Lee for, as she so often does, putting me in the way of some fine words from somebody else. In this case, Emily Dickinson, who said once, "I am small like the wren." And I think it's an act of sort of chutzpah and intellectual jokiness to have that at the start of what looks to me like quite a big poetry book. Nonetheless, it speaks to ideas of humility and self, small within the large, small s self within the large s self that this book explores. Essentially, I shouldn't say this because poets stand up and tell you that they had a very considered idea of what the book was going to be when they put it together. These are the poems I've written over the past 5 years. That's about it. And they're the best books in my view, in a way, not especially overworked. This time, a year ago, I sat down with work that I'd written since Fire Diary, my last work, and I thought I'd have enough for a book, and I found I had enough for 2 books. And a whole bunch of other stuff as well, which is still waiting for me to work on it. But it became clear over a couple of weeks that if I organised things in a certain way, I had a couple of books there that actually spoke to a different set of things. So, Blue Cantos, in fact. So that was behind the titling poem, and it struck me as a way to organise the poems in this collection. My mother, of course, said to me, bless you, Tredinnick, who's not here tonight, but Bruce, said, so tell me about your next book. Is it a book of bird poems? Mother's up for such comments. And of course it's right in a sense. I never have written a poem into which a bird didn't want to fly. But they aren't all bird poems. One of the 4 sections here is called Stray Birds, and those mostly are poems about white-faced herons, or not about them, of course, but beginning with them. John just quoted the right passage about that, really. It's just where they start. Really, a poem is always a kind of divination of the wider world, the world beyond, just beyond our ken, and deep inside us somewhere. And poetry seems to me especially gifted at, as a dividing rod, at picking up the frequencies on which the other world runs. So birds do that for me as well, so they come up quite a bit. Stanley Kunitz, I quote a little bit in the note that I write at the end of the book. He says, "I have walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I am not who I was." It's wonderful, isn't it? I love that whole thing. And in a sense, that I quote him because I think it describes this book, the lives of the birds I have walked through. Each of us has many lives before this and after this and all at once. And those near and dear to us, I've walked through those lives as well. And one of the sections from which John read a little bit of my grandfather poem, The 13 Winds it's called, is really about that kind of affection that one has, the familial. So there are poems there that begin as 21st birthday poems to my son and 80th birthday poems to my father, and the poem there for my grandfather. Where's yeah, sure.
Are there people who need to come in?
I see a soul admitted to itself, finite infinity. That's the poem 1695. This poem rips off some lines of Emily Dickinson, all very dutifully noted at the end, very carefully. You'll also pick up a little bit of a Rilke riff here. There are a bunch of birds in here, and the poem is for Gwen Ford, whom I knew a bit. She was married to the very great Australian garden designer Gordon Ford, and I've stayed in that garden a few times, and I think this poem began. Richard? there. I think that's all I need to explain. The morning is a soul admitted to itself, and the room makes a perfect blind. I sit at the window, neither in the world nor out, and watch rain fall through the anchorite quiet, and birds come among the shrubs like daylight among darkness, like bell ringers into silence, harbingers of themselves, of all ourselves, peeled pieces of eternity's paint, flown home to touch up the weather. In the lower branches, a rufous fantail turns and demurs, displaying his tail the way a card sharp shows his hand, giving nothing but grace away. Rain fell all night, it falls still, and rivers spill their banks. It can't have been easy going overnight, but here's the bird and his mate, immaculate and certain now's the time. A bird can do it, but will you tell me how a god can flame with such temperate heat in the rain, and prevaricate on every other limb, so like a dancer on an unlit stage? How might a woman, how might a man, unless that's us out there even now. Anyway, the rain falls on and Rilke carries his card deck away, and all through the afternoon Emily Dickinson's in my ear, and the darkness clears, and later on outside in the real world's other life, the lights come on and lock the top clean off my neighbour's scarlet elm. The end of the day is an epiphany held and held until even the night birds tire of it, and the children come to find out what's for tea. But I sit here with Emily a little longer, for news has come that a friend has passed, and I hope she's somewhere finite now, but endless, a place like her garden in Eltham, which she observed as a practice and lived as a life that might just prove eternal. You never know. At death, another friend tells me, another poet, admittedly, who's done time on that threshold, there's a struggle and a light show, somewhat like my day, and finally an and, no end in sight. But night falls now, the darkness we grow accustomed to in the meantime, and the birds get about their first dry night in weeks. Evening is a solitude of space in which a half moon hangs, hedging all our bets. And I walk out of the divine, mad sense the day has made, alone with me all day. I leave my dead friend among the birdsong on the other side of her conjunction, and sit in happy finitude to tea. It was not a faith that held much with dancing. Teetotal, charitable, stern, stone cold, sober. I think he came in that way. A stiff black shirt and a white dog's collar, a good book in his steady hand. He lived most of his life within an inch of one tight pastoral trope or another. The Christmas Eve, for instance, when I watched him, axe in his preaching hand and a hen running, heedless and headlong and unrepentant around the vegetable patch, stepping out an absurd and touching dance of death until she stopped. So at first I was embarrassed for him and unbelieving when I slid into the crowded chapel late with you, and what we had been doing in particular on a Sunday morning would have pleased him even less than dancing. And saw what a lifetime of prayer could never have conjured, my grandfather at the pulpit, waving his cassocked arms like a gospel singer, rapping his sermon, jiving his exegesis, swaying today's reading more like Katy Perry than Leonard Cohen, until the congregation overcame in a bar or two 150 years of self-righteous and frightful rigour and joined in. Oh, singing had always been all right, as long as the words were by one Wesley and the tune by another, as long as the Lord moved in every line in stubborn and unmysterious ways, so long as there was salvation in every chorus, but not just for anyone. But this was funk, this was blues, the real dance, the steps, sorry, I missed a line, but this was funk, this was blues, I've done it again. This was my grandfather's gruff faith become love, sweet love. This was sex and sense and beauty, the steps for once, to the dance, the real dance this time. This was the chicken redeemed. What I witnessed was a holy man, secular and glorious, coming out. And not only his, and the way he moved, you knew he'd had it in him all his life. Oh sure, it was awkward. It was Bollywood barn dance. It was Mormon bluegrass, Kumbaya and Hope FM. But it felt like heaven, humbled and glad of it, like a license to live forever. And when I slipped out the back with you, he was up there yet, he's at it still, preaching with his hips, a plump Methodist bodhisattva, swaying easy as you please in the fields of time, his blue eyes crooning beautiful half-truths. I think I discovered what poetry really could do and what it meant and how it called me when I was at school and did Jerry Manley Hopkins and Keats actually at the same time, a light in the water poplar. For 10 blue minutes she sits wrapped in her sacerdotal self, murder on her mind. And I watch her steal her own silent show, doing nothing immaculately among the silver leaves, until, as if my eyes had pinned her, the instant they drop, she flies. The stillest bird in Christendom reaches escape velocity faster than I can find a pen. And I'd like to learn to sit so still and to disappear so well, my body become a famished thought, my mind become a world. Thank you very much.
Well, that's the end of the formal part of the proceedings. The bookshop will be open just through that door. Hilary Davidson's very kindly agreed to be our bookseller.